Good morning, and welcome to the newly renovated DCU Center. Hopefully you've already seen the changes by attending an event in the last couple months, but if not, what you're seeing is a completion of the second phase of improvements which have much needed retrofits to a 30-year-old arena, mechanical systems, new suites, a new club space, new concession spaces, additional restrooms, a much improved connection to the urban environment with windows and landscaping, and a soon-to-be completed sandwich shop on the opposite corner. While all of our corporate partners are critical to our success, I want to call out two of them this morning. DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union, our naming rights partner, for their ongoing support and commitment to this facility, but also all of the city of Worcester. And Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. I understand a few of you ended up at our convention center this morning, so apologies for that. You are in the new Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Pavilion, which is a space that's been designed to create better flexibility to host a variety of unique activities on those days that the arena might not be scheduled with another event. Events like today. We thank Harvard Pilgrim for sharing the vision before the facility reopened, growing our position in the community for not only outstanding major entertainment events, but also as the civic center that we are. This has always been our core value, and in the words of Harvard Pilgrim, you can count us in. Planes, trains, buses, and automobiles, all critically important for bringing residents and visitors to downtown Worcester, all critical for the ongoing success of the DCU Center. Whether improved air access for performers, athletes, and speakers, improved train schedules to bring fans from the east, improved bus service to transport attendees from Union Station or throughout the city with the new downtown hub connector to enjoy all that the city has to offer. Come a long way in 10 years, and I'm certainly looking forward to what the next 10 years will bring. With that, I'm going to turn you over to Roberta, Dr. Schaefer, and without further ado, Dr. Roberta Schaefer, President and CEO of the Research Bureau. I'm going to yield the microphone to her, but this is likely her last forum to be hosted by her at the helm of the Research Bureau. So please join me in a rousing round of applause for the hundreds of forums she has organized over her tenure, continuously promoting informed public debate and decision-making. With that, Dr. Schaefer.
Thank you all very much. I wasn't expecting that this was my swan song. I guess it's official. I have no choice now. But I also want to say that I thank you all for all the support you've given me over the years. And I also am very pleased with the choice of my successor, Tim McGurthy, and he's sitting here, and I hope that you will all welcome him and provide him with the same support that you all have supported me with over the years. Thank you very much. So I want to thank Sandy and the entire DCU Center staff for hosting today's event. And I also want to special thanks to John Prankavicius from Massport for his assistance in putting together today's program. This program is part of the Research Bureau's Francis Harrington Forums on Municipal Government. And the Research Bureau, the sponsors for today's program are Commerce Bank, Polar Beverages, and Massport. And we thank you very much for your sponsorship. We also want to express our appreciation to the Telegram and Gazette for advertising our event and covering so many of our activities. And please be sure to visit our website, www.wrrb.org, where you can read the Research Bureau's announcements, reports, and upcoming events, and videos of our past events, the most recent forums being on manufacturing and OPEB, other post-employment benefits. So the purpose of today's forum is to examine the role of transportation in recruiting and retaining companies, creating jobs, and expanding the tax base in the central Massachusetts region. What are our regional transportation assets, and how can we capitalize on them to expand our economy? So we've put together this very impressive panel, and I will ask our moderator, Tim Murray, to introduce them. I don't think that Tim needs any introduction, but as you all know, he is the former mayor and former lieutenant governor of the state, and now president and CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. Tim has been a very strong advocate for transportation and a resource for improving the many modes of transportation in Worcester and the region. Please join me in welcoming Tim Murray.
Good morning. Thank you, Roberta, and I just want to echo what was previously stated by Sandy. I think all of us who have had a chance, and I've had an opportunity in various capacities and elected roles to work with Roberta. She, whether we might agree or agree or not, and we agreed probably more than people think, she brought an incredible passion and I think commitment to this organization and its mission and to the city and issues for the region, and that passion is contagious and will be missed. We look forward to her. As she said, she's not going away, and she'll still be involved, and I think that's a good thing for our city and region. The topic for today's discussion is transportation and economic development engine for central Massachusetts? And that might be a rhetorical question that does not require an answer. Yesterday, we were privileged to have Fred Eppinger as the keynote speaker for the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce 138th meeting, and he referenced both the MBTA and commuter rail expansion, JetBlue, as being a factor in Hanover's engagement and commitment to the city. So we look forward to the discussion today. We've got three individuals who bring unique experience over their careers and in their current positions to this issue, and I'll introduce them in the abbreviated version of their bios. Eric Sheffels is the President and Chief Investment Officer for Leggett McCall Properties. For 30 years, he's been involved in all aspects of Leggett McCall's operations, acquisition and development, asset management, and construction. He received a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and a Master's in Construction Engineering from Stanford. And then speaking with Eric a little bit before the meeting with Roberta, we also learned that he's not only a pilot, but a farmer, and hails from Montana. So Eric, welcome. Tom Glynn is the CEO and Executive Director of Massport. He was appointed to that position on November 1st, 2012. I would note that Mike Angelini, a member of the Massport board, led that search to help bring Tom to Massport. And as we noted, he earlier in our informal conversation, Tom has been in central Massachusetts on a regular basis, and perhaps more than any other Massport CEO and executive director previous. Tom at Massport oversees a $564 million operation, over 1,000 employees. Assets include Boston Logan International, Hanscom in Bedford, Worcester, Port of Boston, the Conley Container, as well as the Black Falcon Cruise Terminal. Prior to leading Massport, he was the COO, Chief Operating Officer of Partners Healthcare, which has oversaw an $8 billion budget and 3,300 employees. He is a lecturer at Harvard. Tom has his BA in economics from Tufts, his PhD from the Heller School at Brandeis. And then our final panelist is Rich Davey. Again, no stranger to many in the room, a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross. He has been the MassDOT Secretary and CEO since September of 2011. In that capacity, oversees 10,000 employees. He's also served as General Manager of the MBTA and MassDOT's Rail and Transit Administrator. In that capacity, overseeing 15 regional transit authorities, and we have Steve O'Neill from the Worcester Regional Transit Authority here with us today, as well as MassDOT's rail program. He's got his Juris Doctorate, summa cum laude from Gonzaga, and which I did not know, also did some work with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Hillsboro, Oregon. And he lives in Boston and is somebody who lives with his wife, and noted in his bio, car-free. He needed the train this morning, though. So our panelists, let's jump right in, and we'll start with the Secretary. Secretary, you've been involved in a hands-on way to much of the progress across the state, but certainly here in central Massachusetts, when decisions are made, how does economic development factor into transportation planning and investment?
Well, I appreciate the introduction, LG. I still cannot call him Tim Murray, by the way. He's LG. He always will be LG in my mind. Let me answer the question straight out. Absolutely. Transportation is an economic engine, not only for central Massachusetts, but for Massachusetts, for the region, and frankly for the United States, which is in part why it's so frustrating to watch how little action is going on down in Washington. But you should all be proud that a lot of work is going on here in the Commonwealth, thanks to the governor, former lieutenant governor, and your legislative delegation. A lot of work is going on. I mean, we see three pillars of economic improvement in Massachusetts, being infrastructure, innovation, and education. We'll talk about the transportation of those three pillars, but largely why we believe Massachusetts is emerging faster and stronger than most other economies in the United States. It's in large part because we have made the conscious investments in transportation, and in transportation here in the Worcester area. Obviously, folks know, I think it's our goal to have a traffic cone on every road in the Commonwealth. We are well on our way, I think, to do that. We are making significant investments everywhere, but one significant investment just in this area is, of course, the Burns Bridge over the Quinsigamon. And that $90 million investment, revising, really making a new bridge that's 100 years old, is key, among the many other investments that are happening. But clearly, transportation is actually, at the end of the day, not about planes and trains and automobiles. It is about what we can in government do, which is enable the private sector to make investment. So if you can't move your employees or your goods or your customers in and around a region, you are not going to invest here in Massachusetts, period. We heard that, and continue to hear that so often from business leaders everywhere across the state, which is why I think, in large part, we were able to raise transportation revenues for the first time in 23 years around the gas tax, because business supported the administration's efforts in that regard, and the legislature. I think people really got it that we had been for too long inappropriately investing, stealing our capital dollars to pay for operations, not investing in places like the Worcester Regional Transit Authority or in the airport here in Worcester for that matter. And that we had to be honest with folks, that we had to pay the bills that we had accumulated over the last 20 years and then make sure we were investing all across the state, including in central Massachusetts. I'll let Tom talk about the airport and the significant investment and the doubling down we are making here in Worcester, by the way, in that regard. And that is a key one. And as the LG mentioned, obviously our train service as well has been a huge improvement. So whether it was the freight changes out of Beacon Park Yard here into downtown, into Worcester, which is key for CSX and the movement of freight and goods, which is important. But at the same time, launching more commuter rail service between Worcester and Boston, the New England's obviously two largest cities, is critical. We'll be doing that at the end of the month, as folks know. And we would like to do more. 20 round-trip trains is good, but we would like to see more in the future. Worcester is our fastest growing line. It is now our second highest utilized line in our entire system, sans Providence, the Providence line. And we see a lot of growth opportunity for folks. Has anyone driven on the Mass Pike lately? So, just for the record, there are people who raised their hand who are still on the Pike trying to get here. You know, we're not building any more superhighways in Massachusetts. We don't have the road space. It is not our policy as we look to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so our proposals around transportation have been about expansion and improved capacity on the transit side, and about making our road systems more efficient without expanding them in the future. And so transit and rail in particular to this region is critically important. You know, this is a fast-growing region. We want to be able to provide the kinds of services around mobility that need to happen. I'll cede my time at this point and let others folks, I want to talk a little bit about the WRTA as well and a few other things as we loop back for questions. But I'm excited to be here. I should also note Mike Angelini, who's the vice chair of the board of Massport, is here. Dana Levinson, a son of Worcester, and my chief financial officer is here in the room as well. I know Tom will introduce some of the folks at Massport who run an exceptional service for us. So appreciate being here today and look forward to the conversation.
Tom, you've seen this from both sides of the coin as COO of Partners, making sure your employees are where they need to be, economic development, transportation. How are they related?
You want a microphone?
Well, in the immortal words of Ronald Reagan, I paid for this microphone, so it seems like I ought to be entitled to have one. You guys, really.
He obviously wants me to talk, right?
Thank you very much. I do want to make a couple of acknowledgments, as the Secretary said. First of all, Mike Angelini is somebody that we all rely upon for his advice and counsel. He is the vice chair of the board. He'll be running the next board meeting. He was the chairman of the search committee that recruited me, so obviously he has great judgment. Also, I have to say, the Lieutenant Governor, Congressman McGovern, have done amazing work on behalf of the communities in central Massachusetts to produce the topic we're going to talk about today, the Worcester Airport. A lot of things kind of behind the scenes, a lot of things that everybody is aware of. So the fact that we are having this conversation is really a tribute to the great skills they bring to solving a lot of problems. There are a couple of people here today, as the Secretary said, from the Massport team, some of whom you know better than others. John Prankavicius, who is our CFO, is from Worcester and served with distinction in the Worcester city government. Ed Frenney is the director of aviation. If there are questions later about health care, because we're in the Harvard Pilgrim Pavilion, I should handle those. If you have any hard questions, you can ask Ed. And if you have any really hard questions, you can ask Andy Davis, because he runs the Worcester Airport. So we try to make sure we had a full complement. And Matt Brellis is here, who's our Director of Communications. So today, I just want to talk a little bit about the topic at hand and the question the Lieutenant Governor just asked us to address, which is kind of the impact of transportation investments on the economy. And I want to start off by talking about, Massport has two missions, a transportation mission and an economic engine mission on behalf of the Commonwealth. And we don't think those are in conflict. We think they are, joined at the hip. So the first question is kind of how are we doing on the launch from November 7th, and I want to talk about that. And then the second question is a report that we're releasing today in conjunction with this forum that we commissioned to take a look at the cost-benefit analysis of the money that's being invested mainly by the public sector, a little bit by the private sector, and then what are the benefits to the community, over time to kind of validate this premise that transportation does drive the economic engine. But first on the progress report, so we've had about a month now of flights starting November 7th, so that's roughly 120 flights. We're very pleased, and JetBlue is very pleased that the load factors, we're seeing 80% planes full, 90%, sometimes 60 or 70, but in general, ahead of where JetBlue was hoping they would be at this stage as we head into the holiday January, February, March, April season. In a way, and a more important indicator, JetBlue is very serious about customer service, as you have all read, and those of you who've flown JetBlue are aware of this. So they keep track on a very detailed basis of each of their destinations and each of their flights. So for the month of November, the two flights out of Worcester came in first and third across the whole JetBlue system for customer satisfaction. So I think that's a great tribute to the, the investment that they've made and the, the positive experience people are having. And we recognize that we're going to do a lot of marketing, and they're going to do a lot of marketing. But at the end of the day, word of mouth marketing is the most powerful. And the fact that, people are having a very positive experience, we think, bodes well for how this is going to play itself out, over the next 6 months, year, 2 years, as we try to build from 2 flights a day to 5 flights, 6 flights. I thought we were shooting for 7 flights, but Lieutenant Governor informed me recently we're shooting for 8 flights, so I guess that's what it is. And a lot of that is because of the support of a lot of the folks here in the employer community who've been helping, make sure that people know that they have this new choice and, take advantage of it. And we're seeing that in the people signing up and buying the tickets and having a positive experience. So that's a good news because it obviously triggers more investment by JetBlue, more flights, more choices to kind of reinforce the strengths of this economy. And as we have said repeatedly, Worcester is the second biggest city in New England, and therefore, we need to make sure that on the public sector side, we're making the investments that Worcester deserves. Because it is one of the fastest growing areas of the Commonwealth, and we want to make sure that that continues. So the second thing I want to talk about is kind of the economic engine impacts of the work that we're doing. And we recognize that there is, some skepticism in the transportation world about whether or not we can really turn the corner. Everybody in this room is familiar with previous efforts. And so John Prankevicius took it upon himself to commission a study by an organization called FRASCA, F-R-A-S-C-A, which probably most of you have not heard of. But in the airline industry, they are the best firm to use to do these kind of economic impact studies. They are the kind of the brass ring of doing this kind of analysis. Because we want to be able to say when we're asked, and you're going to ask us, and other people are going to ask us, well, is this a good investment for our community? What are the economic benefits? Because we're investing a lot. So just to start first on the cost side, we're looking at probably over the 10-year period about $125 million worth of investment. So that breaks down into the $15 million that we spent to purchase the airport from the city, the losses that the airport experiences, which hopefully will decline over time, but we're running a roughly $4 million. The commitment we made to pay for the Category 3 landing system, which is about $30 million. And then another series of investments that we're making, to the facilities on the actual airport campus. So that's a big number, but on the other side, we want to see what the benefits look like. So the way FRASCA does these studies, and I'm not going to go through the details, it's going to be posted online today. We're putting out a press release kind of announcing it, and you folks, can go through, and we're happy to come back and talk in more detail, or we'll give you John Prankevicius' home phone number, and you can sort of save yourself. But I want to give you kind of the broad outline so you have a sense that, we're very positive about this investment and what it's going to mean in the long run for the central Massachusetts communities and, the Worcester economy. So they looked at a 10-year window because that's kind of roughly the way these things are done, and that's the way we had looked at the costs. They looked at the experience, which again, a lot of you remember back in 1989, there were 340,000 people who flew out of the Worcester airport. There were 15 departures a day. They looked at what happened at 9/11 to the airline industry across the country. They looked at 14 different markets that are similar to the size of this market. Toledo, they looked at Manchester, they looked at Providence to try to see what's a reasonable expectation. They looked at the 1.8 million potential travelers in this marketplace. And they concluded that over the 10-year period, that will generate about $370 million worth of gain as a result of making the $125 million worth of investment. And that gain comes from more visitors who would not otherwise be coming. That comes from the concession income that gets generated, and it comes from the capital projects that mainly Massport, a little bit in the private sector with Retrix, is making that generates, construction jobs and then the jobs that are generated by the creation of these new facilities. And so, I think we should be comforted that sometimes there's some skepticism, but this is a great example, just like the location of the UMass Medical School in Worcester, 40 years ago. 40 years ago?
Yeah, that's right.
generated a tremendous amount of economic activity with the hospitals and the whole growth of the biotech sector out here. I think the same investment in the Worcester Airport is going to pay these dividends over time. So we're very optimistic. We think we have made a good investment. We think we can see, with outside experts, the path to a lot of economic impact. But most importantly, we're very happy that the people who are taking advantage of the service that JetBlue is offering out of Worcester are happy. I know there, is still some skepticism. This is New England, this is Massachusetts. People are skeptical, and we just need to keep kind of, as the coffee mug says, keep calm and carry on, because there are going to be bumps in the road, and I think everybody is aware. There are always ups and downs in the aviation industry, but we're very confident based on what we've seen so far, and we appreciate the support. And I'm leaving here shortly. Lieutenant Governor and I were talking. This is a project that he was working on with the governor. So we're announcing at 1 o'clock today that for the first time we're going to have service, nonstop service from Logan to China, which is a big deal in terms of the Massport mission to help the business community in Central Mass as well as in Boston get connected to another part of the world. So if I go running out the door at 9:15, that is the reason.
Great.
So I think that is the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you, Tom. Eric, as President and Chief Investment Officer of Leggett McCall, you bring a unique perspective in that you've been in the field for 30 years with Leggett McCall. When your team is making its decisions on where to invest and develop and grow, how does transportation, mobility, or lack thereof factor into your decision-making process?
Obviously, it's a key factor. When I look at the role that I have on this panel, is basically speaking to the private sector perspective on transportation's role. We, as a firm, don't represent directly the number of employees or the budgets that either of these two gentlemen have. But we have, over the course of the past 10 years, been involved in almost $6 billion worth of development in Massachusetts in some capacity or another. Not all of it is principals, most of it is being fee-based development managers. I'd like to comment first on transportation's role among other key economic drivers in the role of transportation infrastructure. Secondly, maybe discuss the role of transportation infrastructure in business location decisions and give some specific examples that come from our business relationships, and maybe opine on the relative roles of government and the private sector in facilitating those decisions. And then maybe close with some thoughts on future transportation needs in central Massachusetts. First, a little bit about Leggett McCall. We are only 40 people, but as I mentioned, we've done some relatively large projects over the course of our careers. Central Massachusetts represents about 10% of our development activities over the last 3 decades. So we've been associated with about $600 million worth of projects west of 495. In the office, residential, industrial, biotech, data centers, hotel, and medical markets. Our clients include hospitals, universities, religious institutions, nonprofits, as well as corporate entities. Our decisions to invest in any given sector of real estate or in any given region are predicated upon our opinion as to whether we're going to be successful or not. So this feeds a little bit upon what Secretary Davey and Tom Glenn said about transportation needing to facilitate the decisions of the private sector to come in and invest our own money or those of our clients. The role of transportation as an economic development driver, when I speak specifically to the commercial sector, we need to think like our clients do. What do our clients need to be successful? Certainly they need a competitive product or service offering, they need the employees to produce, and they need the facilities to locate in. We obviously focus on the latter, the facilities. But just as critical are the employees, and Worcester really has almost an embarrassment of riches in their access to skilled labor coming out of the colleges and universities, which they need to do a better job in fully exploiting. You need to find a way to retain those grads in the area. And I think that's key toward trying to get facility siting decisions. We look at transportation, and this again is very similar to what Secretary Davies said, is transportation's role is to enable the efficient, cost-effective, and convenient transport of materials and people to and from production facilities. So that's a broad categorization that might talk about CSX bringing materials to the area, or the highway infrastructure network bringing people to service jobs. I'd like to talk about some key business location decisions that have come from transportation-related issues. And this is really just going through these $600 million worth of developments over the course of my career. Northborough Biotech, we had bought a 250,000 square foot warehouse building in Northborough. Ultimately, that was leased to Genzyme, who subsequently invested nearly $100 million in the facility. It's just off of I-290, and if you were to talk to them, what they would have told you is it was absolutely a key component that they had easy access to the highway infrastructure network to get back to their facilities in Boston and Framingham, as well as access to labor. Last two major projects, one of which we are currently undertaking for Partners Healthcare, are data centers, one out in Holyoke that the Patrick administration was a great facilitator of that. It was a consortium of 5 universities, MIT, Harvard, BU, Northeastern, and UMass, 2 private sector firms. And it was probably less reliant on traditional transportation infrastructure, but was much more reliant on access to cheap utilities, access to fiber, and its location outside of traditional grid networks. Those 2 facilities together represent, again, almost another $200 million worth of development in central Massachusetts. We've previously owned industrial properties in Auburn. We've built assisted living facilities in Auburn. We were associated nearly 3 decades ago with one of the first office parks, Westboro Office Park, at the intersection of 495 and Route 9. I'd like to last speak to the specifics of a project near and dear to our hearts, the City Square 2 project that's immediately adjacent to us here. This represents kind of the epitome of what we would call a smart growth facility or a transit-oriented development facility. Ultimately, through its first 2 phases, it will incorporate not only office and medical, but soon to be hotel and residential. And in this case, transportation was arguably the key enabling driver of the project and illustrates well the roles that government and the private sector play in facilitating growth. It sits at the nexus of not only train, but also a new relocated bus terminal and clearly right off of the interstate network. The seeds of that project were sown well over a decade ago by Mr. Murray when he was the mayor of Worcester, and it's taken quite some time to fully blossom. It really represents kind of a quintessential structure of a public-private partnership that was put in place by not only the city, but also the state and private property sector owners at the time. Our involvement dates back only 3 years. It really falls to our predecessors at Berkeley Development, who I'm going to say brought the ball to about the 5-yard line and put the framework of a public-private partnership in place. It's a very, very complex deal, but at its core, it had the public sector contributing toward the restoration of a transportation network of roadways by demolishing the former mall property and rebuilding the roadways to allow for future development. And additionally, it provided a financial vehicle to create parking through DIF bond funding, where future tax increases that were generated through private investment would pay back the bond issuances over the course of time. As I mentioned, we entered the project about 3 years ago at the impetus of our client Hanover Insurance, who you know is a very, very big believer in Worcester and advocate for Worcester. We believe that the investment by a knowledgeable, patient, local firm, coupled with the commitment of the city and the state, would ultimately facilitate the successful development of the City Square parcel. As you know, the first phase of it has really been completed. It resulted in Unum Insurance remaining in the area, retaining over 700 jobs, moving across the street here into a 200,000 square foot build-to-suit facility. Vanguard St. Vincent subsequently bought a parcel of land and invested another $30 million in constructing a 66,000 square foot cancer facility. Those 2 investments combined equaled something in excess of $100 million and were fully enabled and would not have been possible absent the contributions by the city and the state to allow the demolition and reconstruction of the roadway network. Second phase of that project is now pending, and there are amendments to our agreements in front of the City Council now. The development team has, in fact, subsequent to the initial purchase, acquired 2 more parcels of land, expanding the geographic bounds of our project in buying a church and as well as an adjacent building from Berkeley Development. Next phase of the property will involve a 150-room hotel development constructed by a local developer, as well as a 350-unit apartment complex constructed by a local developer. It represents, I think, exactly what the state should be doing and what government should be doing in conjunction with the private sector. Specifically, the state had what I'll say is a show me attitude. In other words, if you show me that you're willing to invest private dollars, we will in turn show you that we can help facilitate some of the things that it'll take to make you successful. In fact, in conjunction with the subsequent land purchases, the state committed another $11 million toward infrastructure improvements to the project. There will also be public parking garage improvements that will be associated with the project upcoming. So the key takeaway points that I would suggest from this are that absent the demolition of the mall and the reconstruction of the transportation network, none of this could have or would have happened. It could not have been done solely with private sector funding. Public funding has been leveraged to a multiple of the private sector funding and will continue to produce tangible benefits in construction jobs and permanent jobs. Real estate tax revenues will ultimately pay back a substantial portion of that public investment through the repayment of publicly issued bonds. All four components of the project, office, hotel, medical, and residential, were affected not only by the roadway improvements, but also by the proximity to I-290, the train station, and the relocated bus terminal, all key components to a vibrant transportation infrastructure. I think with that, I'll...
Thank you, Art. Well, thank you, and I think that the vision that we all had, I think, is to facilitate the type of investment decisions that you referred to, and hopefully that can continue as we move forward on phase two. Tom, if you could, and I know we have a hard stop for you at 9:15 because of the announcement today relating to China and the airlines coming to Logan, and that is going to be directly related to the question that I've got, which is Boston Logan International is known as Boston Logan International, and a major focus that the board and you have been working on is to bring more international flights. That has a corresponding impact or opportunity for Worcester, and if you could, a peek around the corner as we get this study and JetBlue grows and expands, what do you think long-term that focus of making Logan more international, bringing more international flights means for Central Mass?
So, I think from the earliest days of the Patrick Murray administration, they were very focused on the global economy and trying to make sure Massachusetts stayed competitive in the global economy. And key to that, as the Lieutenant Governor just said, are the international flights. So really, shortly after they took office, they led a trade mission to Asia to kind of try to get these discussions going. So in the last really 2 years now, we've had 5 kind of major announcements that we've made. So the first one was Japan Airlines, which started flying a little over a year ago from Logan to Japan daily, 7 days a week. Those flights have tended to be 85% full. Then we announced Copa Airlines, which is not that well known in the Northeast, very well known in other parts of the country, but they are the major first-class, 5-star airline that flies now from Boston to Panama City, which is then a gateway to 65 locations in South America. And as we sometimes point out, one of the advantages of flying there is when you come back, you don't have to go through Miami, even though we never criticize other airports. So that's the second one. Then the third one was Emirates Airlines, which is obviously flies to the Middle East, but also is a major gateway to India. And Turkish Airlines, which is again a major airline with great service. So those 4, and then today we're adding China. So we think this helps all of the regions of the state, particularly the major employers, many of whom, as we said earlier, are located out in central Mass. Because they want to be competitive in the global economy, and the easier we make it for folks to, to get around and to build the relationships that you need to be successful in business these days, the better off we're going to be. So we think that this focus has really paid significant dividends to have this many new flights. A lot of it is keyed off the success of Japan Airlines, because when folks saw that, we were able to be successful with those folks, they were more willing to build a relationship with us, because at the end of the day, Boston is not the biggest market just based on population, but we've made the argument it is a big market based on traveling population. So, we think everybody's going to benefit, including, the folks in Central Mass, many of whom have relationships, like other companies that are, that are global, not just local.
Would the utilization of those gates at Logan provide more opportunities for domestic carriers here in Worcester?
Well, the utilization of those gates.
By the international flights?
Yeah.
Facilitate or potentially facilitate the relocation of some of the domestic flights currently out of Logan
I
to
see what
Worcester.
you're trying to say. Well, I think that I'm trying to put a positive spin on it. I think that, Worcester is going to be successful in its own right. We have, at the moment at Logan, fewer flights than we had, say, 10 or 15 years ago, even though we have more passengers, because the yield, management system has promoted, higher, 85% planes being full as opposed to the old days, 50 or 60%. Whether we would end up having to relocate flights from Logan gates to Worcester gates is a problem that we haven't faced yet. We're looking at, in our strategic planning process, maybe growing from roughly 30 million to 40 million passengers over the next, say, 15 years, because in airport planning you need to be that far ahead, because you can't just do these things by turning on a dime. So we're looking at growth in other markets besides Logan that is consistent with that. But we haven't gotten to the stage of saying we think we're going to be limited at Logan and therefore having to shift flights elsewhere. It doesn't mean we won't get there, but we haven't gotten there yet. So, I think the focus from our point of view has been to just make sure that, we're as successful as we can be serving the folks in Central Mass.
Rich, Sue Mailman, who is the incoming chair of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, shared with me an article from Banker and Tradesman that recently came out that talked about basically congestion being an impediment to development, in particular in the greater Boston area. And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, 20 trains between Worcester and Boston at the end of the month. You'll be working on upgrading the signalization in the tracks, which should reduce train times, both for the express and the local trains between Worcester and Boston. But two things. Once we hit our attained goal of 20 round trips, how do we grow that? How does Beacon Park Yard and the redevelopment of Beacon Park Yard create more opportunities for further rail to North Station? And then secondly, the issues regarding development and investment, transportation, and plans to reduce congestion. I know you're intimately involved in the Beacon Park Yard piece.
No, absolutely. So it is. I mean, congestion is something as we transition away from transportation finance to really begin to think about. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the policy of this administration to build more superhighways. It's neither the right environmental policy, nor do we have the room to do it. So if you accept that premise, then there are two things we have to do. One is to continue to invest in transit and mobility. And then two, to the LG's point, is think then about the congestion question. So on the transit side, certainly in commuter rail, we are making, as the governor says, the unglamorous business of transportation investments in signal and track all along the Worcester line, mostly in the urban core in the Boston area, but that will help train traffic up and down the corridor. Yawkey Station, which has been a bit of a cog in our wheel, if you will. We have a one-track operation right now because of that. Will open on December 23rd. That will help relieve congestion along the tracks and allow us to not only successfully launch the 20 round trips, but also look for future Thanks to the LG and the governor, we've made significant investments in new locomotives and new coaches. All of that, folks will see all along the Worcester line, in fact, all across the state, but certainly in the Worcester line where we continue to see growth. That's really important. On the congestion side from the road question, we are absolutely at a crossroads in the state. Yes, we were able to get transportation finance now, but the gas tax, which is the primary way we fund transportation projects in the Commonwealth, consumption of the gas tax has largely been flat the last 10 years in the state, and it is clearly going to decline over time, which is a good thing, because that means we're going to have more fuel-efficient vehicles. That means we'll have better air quality in Massachusetts and the Northeast. But the primary source of the revenue that we have to fund transportation projects will decline. It will decline. So we have to think more strategically about that. One idea which we continue to talk about is having more tolling across the state, not just on the turnpike, but across the state. That requires federal intervention. It requires Congress to allow us to do more tolling in places like I-93 or I-95 or at the borders. And then it, in the future, potentially allows us to look at what is called congestion pricing, basically charging more or less depending on when you drive. It has been rolled out very successfully in places like London and Singapore, and in, I think, Copenhagen. So we have to think, I think, more creatively, again, about using efficient roads. I could also talk to you all day about self-driving cars, which is not as far off as I think we all think in terms of road efficiencies as well. But it is clear to me that when we talk about congestion, we have to talk about efficiencies in our road system, because we can't build any more. And there are many tools that we can bring to bear. All electronic tolling, which the governor and LG pushed me hard to do. We are rolling out across the state. All electronic tolling will be up on the Tobin Bridge at the end of the month, and we'll be rolling it out statewide over the next 2 years. And that will allow us to not only improve some congestion along the turnpike and other key areas in our tunnels of the Tobin Bridge, but allow us to be more creative in how we potentially toll all across the state in the future. That is clear. It has to happen. If you believe that the gas tax is going to decline, as I do, all the numbers show it, we're going to have to think more creatively, because the need is there. Infrastructure, you know, from a business perspective, it is a capital-intensive business, period. We are replacing bridges that were built 75 years ago, 100 years ago, and it's because we haven't been honest with ourselves about what it means to be continue investing in these assets. And so we have to find a sustainable way to do it. But we can do it with not only managing congestion, but also a responsible way, I think, to fund infrastructure across the state. So more to come. I think in the short term, thanks to some of the work that's been done over the last few years, we're in a good place, but we have to think, certainly long term, in the next decade, is a place where we're really going to have to think about how we fund transportation in the future.
Eric, two things. You mentioned in your remarks the embarrassment of riches that we have as it relates to our colleges and universities, and how we've got to do a better job across organizations and municipalities in retaining that talent here. Part of that has to do with us collectively telling the story of the value proposition that exists in central Massachusetts. And when you make decisions and where to invest and who to partner with, any examples or communities where you feel they do a good job that we might be able to emulate in terms of promoting what we've got here, knowing that Boston does get a disproportionate amount of the time and attention and focus here.
Well, Boston does get a disproportionate amount, but you kind of ask yourself why. One of the key drivers of Boston, obviously, is our university infrastructure, of which you have very, very similar attributes. In fact, a number of the employees of our firm come from Worcester-based institutions, and they're very, very good. A couple of things that I think have changed over the course of my career in the way that we begin to think about where people want to locate, live, and work. Specifically, when I first joined Leggett McCall Properties in the early 80s, it was pretty clear that there was a ever-expanding concentric circle coming outside of Boston, where most expensive real estate was in Boston. You moved out to 128, you moved out to 495, but generally the jobs were moving westward. The companies like Digital Equipment were all out on 495. People wanted to buy a 3-bedroom colonial, and they were going to live in Westboro or Shrewsbury or Franklin. What we're now seeing, and I can see it even in my own children, is that the move of the Gen Y generation is to move into more urban environments, and they're less likely to want to move out in those ever-increasing concentric circles. we're seeing a huge migration, and consequently, it's fueling a lot of the residential apartment construction in Boston today, thousands and thousands of units, frankly, of very expensive apartments. And I think that's one of the things that Central Massachusetts needs to think about, too, and that specifically, I think, is in the process of starting to be addressed at City Square here, bringing bodies back into an urban core, that people want to live in a revitalized urban core. And I think that is, again, an area where transportation improvements, the increasing number of train trips to and from Boston that are going to be proximate here. So I think the vision that was expressed by you a decade ago of revitalizing this urban core is exactly on the money. And the continuing investment by entities out here in that, I think, is very critical.
Thank you, Art. Well, I want to make sure that we've got time for questions for Tom as well while he's here. So if people want to step to the mic and any questions that they might have.
No, it's a great point, and the reverse commute is really what you're potentially talking about. And I think to your point about the young folks, I mean, there are more, at least in our experience, maybe anecdotally, there are more young folks living in places like Somerville and Cambridge, but working in places like Littleton and Maynard, and they don't want to own cars. So how do we get them there? And that's frankly where the WRTA can be significant. So now we have this beautiful hub at Union Station, so folks can get off a train and get onto a bus and get to where they want to work, where they want to live, or where they want to play. Your point's well taken, Mike. We have to think about congestion in the opposite direction, but that reverse commute, it's sort of a funny phrase that suggests it's the kind of a wrong commute, right? Reverse. It's a reality. So if there's going to be more desire to live in an urban core, whether it be in Cambridge or in Worcester, but work somewhere else, we have to find a way, again, to get folks to those places. We have to improve the mobility question. So congestion certainly is not necessarily an evil, but if well managed, can, I think, nudge folks to good behavior that we want, that it can allow this region to grow, no doubt. Sure. So let me answer that, the second question first. We have a private-public partnership commission now at the DOT, which was created several years ago, that is contemplating possible projects that less privatized, but more that the private sector could potentially build maybe more quickly than us, or bear some additional risks that we don't wish to do. The private sector, unfortunately, in transportation at least, is not a panacea. It's another way to finance, in my opinion, a particular project. And by the way, those toll roads, I've been watching it very closely, as has Dana, who worked on some privatization in Chicago before he came back to Worcester and went to DOT. Mixed success in the United States, mixed success. Toll roads, for example, Virginia recently opened, are not doing as well as anticipated. Florida is the same. Chicago had serious problems with its privatization of its parking, for example, in downtown. Because in part, I think what electeds do, I can say this now because the LG is no longer elected, is push the pricing question off to the private sector. Oh, it's not my fault I raised your prices. It's that guy's fault. And again, it's a way to push the political risk off to some extent, which is having the honest conversation that this infrastructure costs X, and we have to find a way to pay for it. And too often, I think we're told we can have it all and not pay for it. And that's a sort of political discussion on the government side. With that said, I think there are instances where, for example, I mean, we run the largest privatized commuter rail in the world, except for a route, I think, in Australia. And having worked at MBCR and run the commuter rail, I would say, it's been largely successful with some bumps, no doubt. But in part, the state was required to make investments in the system, which we didn't do, which is in part why there have been some bumps. So we have privatization in some instances, no doubt. But I don't see it as a panacea. It has to be targeted. It has to be, I think, risk-based. And I think the public has to, by the way, this is always my favorite at commuter rail, when people just figured out that the commuter rail actually made a profit, there was outrage. Well, the private sector is not going to take over government services if you're not going to take over government services, you're not going to make a profit, right? Absolutely not. So this idea that the private sector is going to step in and run a toll road or run the MBTA, for example, at a loss is crazy. So I think we have to be honest about what the public sector and private sector can do together. And again, there are some instances where it works, but it's not a panacea. I don't know if the other panelists want to comment, but it's my experience for sure.
Hi. First of all, thank you to all the panelists for being here. My name is Nima Hakim. I'm president and co-founder of the recently formed Worcester Student Government Association. I'm also a senior at Holy Cross.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Excellent.
a question that I had, and just from talking to a lot of the students at the other various colleges, is trying to increase accessibility to sort of transportation for the student populations. That obviously having so many students in Worcester is an economic force to be harnessed. So, I guess my question is, how do we increase accessibility to these sort of transportation services? How do we increase awareness among these student populations? And what are some ways to incentivize the use of these services for the various students at these various colleges? Thank you.
So it's a great question. Having graduated from Holy Cross almost 20 years ago now, I don't think I left the Hill very much. And when I did, I came down to a kind of a dirty bus station to take a bus back into Boston because the train station didn't exist, and this really beautiful downtown area was desolate. So 20 years later, coming back, you can see significant progress. But to your point, how do we improve it? Well, I think a few things. One is working with Steve and his team at the WRTA to make more investments in his operation, which we've done at a capital perspective. So he's got new buses, he's got a new fleet. We're going to be building a new maintenance facility, a lot of good stuff, which will then enable him to provide better service for you to get to Assumption or Anna Maria, I should say, or any of the other colleges here in Worcester, whether it be for other courses or for socializing or other activities. A student pass, a university pass, is something we've talked about in the Boston area. I always find it ironic. This is being taped. I'm going to make a comment now about Holy Cross and maybe about BU and a few others that are reluctant to have student passes because it, quote, costs too much. Now, I only recently paid off my student loans. So I think, having some more creativity with universities in Boston and frankly here in Worcester about, by virtue of having a Holy Cross ID, getting on the Worcester Regional Transit Authority for free, right? I think that kind of mobility, if we can make it easier for you. And then finally, what we've been doing, this didn't exist 20 years ago, is now you can find on your phone exactly when the next WRTA bus is coming. And that, I think, is really unlocking. Has anyone taken a bus lately? Probably not, right? Okay, good. A couple folks have. Making the bus sexy again is something we've talked a lot about at the DOT.
How's that going?
It's going well. It's going very well. You've helped. The free Silverline service, you've helped, Tom. But making it more accessible by means of information, I think, can unlock it as well. But I'd encourage your group to talk to Steve and see if there's a way, we could work together in that regard. Because the mobility challenge when I was a student at Holy Cross was tough. Getting into downtown was impossible. You had to get a cab, period, if you wanted to come to downtown. Now you do want to come downtown. And how do we enable that in government? And I think there are a lot of ways to do that. So.
While Richard and Tom are here, are there any plans to improve access to the airport? And might those be an opportunity for economic development along East Court?
So someday I'm hoping somebody will do a report on the decision that was made many years ago to locate the airport in its current location. I've yet to meet anybody in all my trips here who's willing to say they were part of the decision, but it is where it is. I think that as we've looked at this, there's a couple of things. So one is we all recognize, other more direct routes would be desirable. On the other hand, and I mentioned this earlier, in 1989, 340,000 people got to the Worcester Airport under the current road system. And as the Secretary made a more kind of statewide point, but it's true here as well, all the roads that exist and all the pathways that might exist are in residential neighborhoods. And so the opportunity to do a lot in that regard, I think we have to be kind of practical. And to their credit, JetBlue never made this a condition. They believe they can make this work with the existing road system. Now, we've made some improvements on signs, and also, as the Secretary just said, the fact that people can now get directions, iPhone, is a big step in the right direction. So, there are some marginal things that we can do, and we're obviously looking at, some of the bigger things, but I think we have to be practical that there really aren't a lot of pathways that exist that are not going to really, be hard to pull off, because we have to be respectful of residential neighborhoods. And this is New England. There aren't, for most big institutions in New England, you have to kind of work within the framework that you have because, of the age of our facilities and our institutions. It just doesn't, lend itself to having a big open opportunity. So, it's a concern so far, as I say, if we have 80% load factors on the flights, we have our fingers crossed that people, as the word of mouth spreads, that people will see that as kind of a less of an issue. I don't know if I should touch on the price of the tickets and the diversion question before.
Sure.
Because I am sure that's kind of out there a little bit. So let's talk about the diversion question first, because I know that has been a concern. So I guess, from our point of view, so say over the course of the rough month or so, we've had something like 110 or 120 flights back and forth. So we've had 4 diversions. So I know that has been frustrating, and it frustrates us, it frustrates you, it frustrates JetBlue. On the other hand, I guess I would say, JetBlue knew about this when they made the commitment. This is the reason why Massport committed $30 million to the new landing system. I think if you did a review over the last month, there are other airlines that are based in Massachusetts that have probably had more diversions than what you've experienced here. Certainly the people serving Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, they too have a geographic situation that is not always ideal from a flying point of view. So, we intend to work through it. I think that JetBlue more recently has, been a little bit more proactive in kind of managing the situation. But it's a fact of life in the airline industry, whether you're in Boston or you're in Philadelphia or, you're in, Chicago or wherever. In New England, we have the weather we have. We have a fair amount of snow in Boston. You folks have more, and we just have to be, kind of mindful of that and hope that, as we kind of work our way through and we get the new landing system in place, that's not going to happen tomorrow, that will, reduce the issue. But I think, we just have to kind of keep it in perspective in terms of the overall situation. The second question that has come up is this question of pricing. So there's a couple of pieces of that puzzle. So this will take a minute, but I think it's worth spending a minute because I know it's come up and Mike and I talked about it the other day as well. So the first thing is, well, how do airlines do their pricing? And of course, as will come as no surprise, they use, what they describe as a yield management system, kind of similar to the hotels in a sense. If you rent a hotel room on New Year's Eve, it's going to cost more than if you rent it on December 20th, even though it's the same hotel room. And so the airlines, when they're doing their pricing strategies, they have a certain number of low-income tickets, let's say $79, and then they have another category of $89, and then $99. And so, as they fill in the lower price tickets, then they move to the next level. So, for example, in going to Florida, there are roughly 200 seats, from here, but there are 4,700 seats from Logan. And so if you compare the two, you're going to see kind of a different set of dynamics because it's going to take longer to fill up 4,700 than it does to fill up a couple hundred. So that's, the kind of the way they structure their pricing. The pricing is predicated on their goal of filling up the plane, not necessarily, having everybody pay the same amount. Leisure travelers tend to book earlier than business travelers, so that's another factor in this yield management thing. The second thing that we've tried to take a look at is, well, what's the total cost? Because if it's $27 to park at Logan and it's $7 to park here, that needs to get factored into the equation. So we've done some work on that, and again, it may make sense going forward to have a sit down with John and Andy and go through some of this stuff so you can look at it yourself. So we did a review of what the pricing looked like, and then we brought in an outside firm that, again, specializes in this. And they looked at all different kind of trips. So it's a one-person trip, a two-person trip, a four-person trip. Is it the middle of the week? Is it the weekend? Because, again, depending on how you look, you can come to very different conclusions. So, for example, this week, in looking at the cost of flights to Florida, the flight from Boston was $310, Worcester was $206, Providence was $292, Manchester was $322. So that's, you know.
Can I book right now?
You're ready to roll. The last week in January, Boston is 178, Worcester's 266, Providence is 212, and Manchester's 240. So, you know, I think we just have to acknowledge that there's a certain amount of irrationality from a consumer point of view. But I think over time, what we've tried to do is say, okay, well, what is the net delta? And let's be honest about it. And it's probably about a $50 or $60 on average when you sort of, you know, work through all the four-person, two-person, you know, middle of the week, weekend, et cetera, difference. And so people have to decide, you know, whether the convenience factor and looking at the, you know, the other pluses kind of outweigh that additional cost. And I think people do know that JetBlue did make an effort the first week or so to have some very, very low fares. But, you know, they're in the business to make this route work, and we need to work with them to make sure that, you know, we're seeing the kind of load factors that we're seeing at, you know, 80, 85, you know, sometimes, you know, 70 or 60, but so that the whole system is working. So that's, you know, yes, there is, on average, it's probably going to cost a little bit more. It's not always going to cost more. It depends on a lot of factors and how they anticipate what the traveling public is going to demand. But we're, you know, we're mindful of it, and we need to put some of this together so it's a little bit more available to people in the community, because we don't want people to think that, you know, either Massport or Logan is not trying to be cooperative and give people, you know, a good deal. From an airline point of view, you know, this is how the airline pricing structure works. It's not particularly disadvantaged in the Worcester example. It's just it's a little different than you go to CVS in one community and you pay $1.79 for toothpaste, and you go to another community and you pay $1.79. It doesn't work that way, for better or for worse. So I just want to be straight about it, because you folks have been among our biggest supporters in helping to, you know, promote these flights with your employees and your colleagues. And so I know these issues have come up, and, you know, we talked about it a little bit this morning. So I just wanted to kind of address them a little bit and put them in context for everybody.
Well, Tom, thanks, and we know that you've got a hard stop at 9:15, but I know on behalf of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau and all of us in Central Massachusetts, the fact that the CEO and Executive Director of Massport can get into that level of specificity in a goal towards making transportation, in this particular instance, JetBlue and Worcester Regional Airport successful, I think is incredibly refreshing for all of us. So thank you, Tom, for being with us this morning. So the question was, Roberta wanted free tolls, I think for herself. And, no, I'm kidding. Yes, and we've taken those away from the new employees for sure. The perk should not exist, but so be it. It was bargained, and we have to honor it. But I think there's actually a misperception. The traffic is not caused by paying the toll, actually, for the most part, as long as we have enough toll collectors out. You will find, by the way, once we take these booths down in 2 years, traffic is not going to magically go away. There'll still be traffic, because congestion is really all about the number of folks on the road as opposed to anything else. So Mother's Day, for example, the Friday before Mother's Day and the Friday before Columbus Day are actually the two most heavily traveled days of the year on the Massachusetts Turnpike. Folks think it's Thanksgiving week. Thanksgiving week is usually somewhere around between the 7th and 15th highest days. And so, point saying that is we're actually trying to dig now down into the data, right? Which is exactly what you've been doing, right? Is looking at what the actionable data is for the department. And so all these nice signs that we have up, 5 minutes, 10 miles, or pull over, oh my God, there's a lot of traffic ahead. Actually, while it's informing you about what's going on the Turnpike and I-93,
we are actually now getting actionable data to show very specifically and in detail where the traffic peaks are on our road system. And in turn, that is going to allow us to have some more congestion management techniques. But I can assure you that eliminating tolls is not an effective one. And as I said, once we take the tolls down and put up just the gantries, and you're just going to be paying at 65 miles an hour, it doesn't mean you'll be going 65 miles an hour when there are, a lot of cars in the road. So the bottom line is no. How's that?
Hi. I guess I'm the only public transportation person in the room. And of course, as both of you know, this is virtually the same forum we had, 10 years ago? And I asked if we could have this on a monthly basis or a weekly, not a weekly basis, but I mean like at least a quarterly basis. And we're having the same conversation. And nothing has really changed. We're still cut off. We can't go west, we can't go north, we can't go south. There's a railroad, but we don't use it. There's no plans for it. And I've asked constantly for workshops and everything. Could we not have public transportation workshops? As long as you focus on other means of transportation, the other problems won't get straightened out. It's a crucial business. Worcester is just going to die from parking lots, from parking, and we don't have local public transportation. I haven't bought a bus pass since June because the bus service has been taken away from us. It's
So-
virtually
So
non-existent.
Joe, is there a question there?
It's more a plea. It's more like, can't we do this?
Mr. Secretary?
I don't want an answer now.
You have brought new levels of engagement on behalf of MassDOT and working in partnership with the RTAs in terms of interfacing with the public and engaging in a conversation. Do you want to share with that?
Sure, and Joe, obviously you've attended our MassDOT meetings, and I appreciate that. You've been very active and passionate on transit, and I appreciate that very much. To say nothing's happened in 10 years, I think is a bit of an exaggeration. We need to do more, there's no doubt, but certainly in the last 10 years, a lot has happened in Worcester for sure and across the state. Relative to the RTAs, we made, I think, some of the most important strides ever in the last 12 months. Steve is now forward funded. What does that mean? We're not irresponsibly paying him in arrears and he has to borrow money and pay interest to banks now. He can actually use that revenue to put into his service. New bus fleet, a new facility here, obviously connectivity, and making sure, by the way, that our 20-round trips are going to make sure that there isn't a bus not waiting for you when you get off the train here. And then our expectation is that each of the 15 regional transit authorities, so there are not just one here in Worcester and the MBTA in Boston, but there are 15 total, will have additional resources starting in July to add additional service. And that's the first time I think we've been able to deliver that in a statewide, maybe ever, Steve. I look to you. I mean, you have been around, and Steve has done a great job of representing all of the RTAs as president of the Association for the Regional Transit Authorities. And so he's been working here in Worcester, but fighting all across the state for better service. So, and my guess is, Joe, that it probably won't be enough for you, no doubt. And this is, I always say that this is a great problem to have, we have in transportation. Our customers want more of us, right? Yesterday in Boston, we announced we're going to run late night service on Friday and Saturday night at the MBTA. We're going to try it out and see how it works. For many, it's still not enough. They would love us to run it, 24 hours.
More. They want more.
Again, and that's okay. But I think we have made some strides. We obviously have work to do, and I think it's in part incumbent upon those. And the LG has pushed us real hard. As has the governor, we have to think more outside of Boston, and we very much have the last few years relative to transportation. So,
Well, if I
Thank
could
you.
just,
Thank you, Secretary Davey. And RTA Transit Manager Steve O'Neill is going to jump up and grab the mic.
well, could I just say that I agree with what you've said in terms that we have more train service, but we're paying for that. We have more trucks clogging the roads locally. We're paying for a lot of things. But the whole point is that only one person in the room said that he took the bus. I think that says everything. Can you please, Tim, start workshops? We desperately need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Steve? And then Steve will be our last
I'll
word.
be short. I just want to follow up. And thank you very much for coming to the city and acknowledging the WRTA and the things that it's done. Mr. Secretary, you've been fantastic, as the Lieutenant Governor and Governor has. Just want to say a couple of things. First of all, the WRTA is in solid financial footing. It wasn't that way 7 years ago Second of all, without the support of the Commonwealth, we would not be able to maintain the services that we have. But more importantly, we've been able to extend service in several different areas, including midnight service, before all the work was done, Mr. Secretary, by you, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor. And more things are coming ahead as we get more funding, especially with the forward funding. And second of all, I just want to say this WRTA perhaps is one of the leaders in all the Commonwealth, of all the RTAs, as far as technology goes. You alluded to that earlier. This is the first time our customers have ever had the availability of checking their buses out in the field or at the new hub. So we've made strides. We're continuing to make strides. And I want everyone to know here, no, we're not finished. We have a lot more to accomplish. And I think working together with the Secretary, we can do more of that as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And with that, we want to thank Secretary Davey, Eric Sheffels, the President and Chief Investment Officer from Leggett McCall. On behalf of the Research Bureau, I also want to thank the sponsors of today's forum, which is Massport, Commerce Bank, and Polar Beverages. And again, for all of us who care deeply about Central Massachusetts and the various issues that impact it, we want to thank Roberta Schaefer for her incredible service to the people and business community and academic community of Central Massachusetts. So thank you.